Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along today to the Football Insomniac podcast. My name is Colin Watt and I'm your host. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the author, Daniel Gray. Daniel, how are you, mate?
I'm all right, thank you, considering. Yeah, it's dreek outside, to use a good Scottish word, and we're all living through this, but at least we've got football to lose ourselves in.
It depends who you support, I think, this season. If you're losing yourself in football.
That's true. The wrong podcast. But you've got the memories. You've got the memories of 8 titles in a row and all the rest. Thank God for nostalgia.
So, I mean, what a week it has been, not only just in Scottish football, but in world football. We see Leicester now going top of the Premiership down south. Could Brendan Rodgers bring them home another league title? We look across the globe, and I don't know if you saw the photos that went out this week of Fernando Torres.
No.
Fernando Torres has now become a coach over in Japan. He's now managing one of the Japanese teams. And if you take a look at the photo and compare it to WWE wrestler John Cena, you would think they were long-lost brothers. It's
I'll
quite
have to
interesting.
see that. When I used to see Torres playing, I had a Middlesbrough. Well, I've got a Middlesbrough season ticket now for what it's worth. But back when he was playing for Liverpool, he was always verging on a mullet. I always thought he was just that far away from being mulleted, and so I'd like to see what his hair's like now. He was in danger of broaching that barrier.
It's interesting because we are going to speak about your book, Daniel, as well. This book here, Extra Time, and one of the stories in the book is actually about ex-professional footballers who, once they give up the game, they seem to pile on the pounds. Yeah. This is the absolute opposite with Fernando Torres. He's went to the gym and he's bulked up. He's looking a bit like The Rock these days. So definitely check that one out later on. We will also be discussing, amongst other things, the January transfer window and whether it should still be part of the game. But the main topic, which I have seen come up in discussion this week, and obviously if you're Scottish, this will mean quite a lot to you because it's been such a long time since we last qualified for a major European Championships. But there is ongoing discussion this week that Euro 2020 or 2021, whatever you want to call it, will not be going ahead. There is discussion in the newspapers today that they are still planning for the tournament, but behind the scenes, health officials are advising that the tournament does not go ahead. Now, Daniel, you're obviously English. You've had the chance to experience England at a major European Championships many times before. But put a Scottish hat on. You're living in Scotland now. What would this mean for the Tartan Army that they wouldn't be able to see Scotland at a championships?
It would just be desperately disappointing. You're right, England's my team, but I've lived up here for 17 years, and the boost that morning after, on that night of the result in Belgrade, was just wonderful to live through. To see other people's joy was fantastic. Some people won't believe that, given the old enemy and all of that stuff. But I know so many good people that have followed Scotland home and away for years and have just been miserable ever since I've known them. And I just want them to be able to carry that joy through, even if you lose all 3 games, which you don't think you will. I think you'll give England, if it does go ahead, a really tight game. I'd be devastated for you. I genuinely mean that. And what I pictured that morning after Belgrade was the journeys down to London, the Trafalgar Square stuff, which I've mentioned Middlesbrough already, but when we've got to cup finals, we go to Trafalgar Square as well. And it's a brilliant thing of all being together. Oh, God, it's impossible to know whether that'll happen, never mind the championships themselves. But I'd be gutted for you. And I genuinely mean that. And it's a good side you've got. They'll grow as they have Clark for longer and longer, I think, and they deserve to test themselves on a higher stage. So, please don't let that happen.
And if you are watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on Periscope, do get involved, which is exactly what Mr. Briggs has done here. And he says it would be the most Scotland thing ever for us to qualify for the first tournament in years, only for it to be cancelled. It wouldn't get put back another year because 2022 is the World Cup year. Although that World Cup is happening at Christmas
in December,
time,
it might end up helping the whole thing. But that'd be a year. I mean, we'd love a solid year of football as fans. Let's be honest. Those in a usual year, those empty summers without a tournament are rubbish, aren't they? So we don't care. We'd run them like cart horses, footballers, if we were in charge, wouldn't we? So.
Absolutely. I mean, just thinking of the amount of games. I mean, I did say last week we had Paul Mitchell on from BBC Scotland, and we were discussing about the amount of games that's played at the moment. And it just feels as though, like, every single day. There's maybe 3 or 4 games of football, and it's so easy just to miss a game right now.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it's on an international stage, I don't know if that would feel different, because everyone enjoys the feeling around a major championships, around the World Cup. So who knows, maybe 2 in the 1 year wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Oh, well, the original question of the Euros, I suppose there are 2 options here, is to go ahead, well, 3 really, not to go ahead without fans, and a miracle of miracle to go ahead with some fans there, aren't there? And you know, if you leave it another year, you would surely guarantee there were fans there. But no, I can't see 12 months of solid football as much as I dream of it. The big mistake here, of course, was the largesse of trying to play it across the whole continent, which just feels draped in money to me. If we'd been able to say it was in one country, whichever it was, across Europe, you're probably looking at being able to contain measures, even if it means not having away fans, sadly. You know, say it was in Germany or somewhere that's dealt with this crisis a bit better, or indeed in Britain, where we can, in theory, govern it. You know, just the tournament in the one place would mean less travelling of players, of fans, of all of that stuff. But the fact it's across the continent seems to be what's one of the things that leaves it open to doubt as to whether it'll go ahead.
And one of the interesting topics about that is the Tokyo Olympics. Now, that is another tournament that was postponed from last year. It's been carried forward to this year. And now it seems as though there is major discussion going on behind the scenes that will not go ahead either. And as you mentioned, obviously that is a lot of people travelling from different countries into the one country, and then being within this bubble sort of thing. And there's talk of that not going ahead as well. For me, if that doesn't go ahead, that is a symbol that the European Championships is under serious threat.
Yeah, you would think so. It'd be amazing if you had one and not the other, especially because that's self-contained just in Japan or in Tokyo. So you'd think if one goes, the other will fall as well, sadly. Yeah, big sigh. I think when the year turned to 2021, we were hoping not to be considering these questions. We're always going, we'll be back in grounds then, we'll be back, we'll have this. And boy, is it dragging on and on and on.
And hopefully,
just to cheer everyone up.
I mean, hopefully, and Danny67 comes in with a great point. By the time athletes will be allowed to by that time vaccines will be available for athletes. Hopefully that's the case. Do you know what I mean? Nobody wants to see this tournament not go ahead, especially Scotland fans. As Scotland fans, we've waited 23 years to get it to a major tournament. I very vaguely remember France '98. That is, I remember the Scotland-Brazil game, and that's about all I remember of that tournament. I've watched it back since, but as a boy, I was only 4 years old at that point. So I don't really remember a lot of it. There's a generation like my own that haven't seen Scotland at a major championships, and I think it would give a bit of a feel-good factor back to Scottish football if we were able to see that. Although I would have never put it down to the fact that we'd be looking at guys like Andy Considine and Declan Gallagher at centre-half to lead us to that tournament, considering all the great players that's played for Scotland beforehand. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. Through the years, you've had so many good players, and I can never, I look back at old sticker books and I see the squad, the players you've had and the players you've left out, being able to leave out, and yet it's this interesting combination and world-class left-backs. The conveyor belt of left-backs that Scotland is just one of those bizarre quirks. But God, you get there however you can with tournaments, don't you? It's cup football, essentially. And so it's game by game, and you did it. And let's hope this goes ahead, and let's hope there are more qualifications to come. And if not this time, then you get to go on one of those brilliant trips. You get to take the camper vans to France and all of these things that people who are there still talk about now. I hear so many stories about '98 and about people that went to Italy in '90 and all of those tales that you just want to be part of. Whatever the results, it is a festival of football, and it feels so far away. The word festival feels so far away from what we're living through at the moment that it's tantalising, isn't it?
Definitely. And just to kind of emphasise and sort of bookend this point, this was brought up by Tartan Army. I would have to say he's a villain amongst the Tartan Army, despite having managed the team for a number of years. Bertie Vogts, who was discussing this with ESPN commentator Derek Ray earlier in the week, and it is of his opinion that the tournament won't go ahead, and that was what was backed up by health officials. I think you're right on the point that you make. The problem we've got here is this is going to be held across 12 different countries. So the travel, the isolation, the bubbles. We've seen what's happened at the minute in the tennis with the Australian Open. It just seems to be a struggle to get that to go ahead with lots of different players travelling from different areas. So we hope that it goes ahead. We hope that the vaccine rollout will mean that this goes ahead. The big thing, I think, is I really can't see there being fans at the games. And it's really devastating for me because I've already booked my travel down to London, and I'm hoping that I'll get it refunded now.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. It's one thing saying it'll go ahead, but I found the football on television without fans there impossible to watch. You mentioned Leicester creeping up to the top of the table. That was sort of lost on me that they were even playing last night till I saw it on the 10 o'clock news. I'm drifting away, not from football. I'm still deeply in love with the game. And through writing about it and being a football writer, I've been able to go to some games in Scotland this season. And before the second lockdown, I travelled a lot in the north of England to matches this season. So I'm luckier than many. But at the same time, I find it soul destroying to watch the games without fans. So when I picture a tournament, I picture that game at Wembley, and I picture Scotland taking way more tickets than they were actually sold, and that kind of thing, and the noise that would be made. To picture it without the sound on that Sky option when you can do that just breaks my heart a little bit. So
we're going to be theoretical here, and we're going to look at if the tournament does go ahead, and obviously Scotland are in the same group as England. As an Englishman, what is your thoughts ahead of that game? Could you see a surprise outcome in Scotland taking something from it?
I certainly could if Scotland played with the heart they've undoubtedly got in this squad, because that's one. You know, England have got some wonderful footballers at the moment. When they turn it on, the pacey football they can play, most teams in Europe can't really live with that. But if they're not quite at the game, which they've often not been in the last year or so, and if Southgate doesn't quite have his first and best 11 in his head, then there's every chance of that. It'll be narrow whatever happens. England are never going to hammer Scotland and rarely have. In fact, I know of more famous Scottish wins than English wins over Scotland, I think, by now. But yeah, there's every chance of a sneaky 1-0 for Scotland. I've thought that since the morning after the night before. But yeah, something narrow, I think, is my sitting on the fence, sitting on Hadrian's Wall answer.
I think if we could all just go back a couple of years and ask Stuart Armstrong to put that ball high into the stands of Hampden Park, then
absolutely
we'd still be talking about that result.
We're going to talk later about footballing delights, and one I've missed in the books I've done is when the film shakes when you're watching a match, and when you got that free kick in that match, the camera shook because Hampden was shaking, wasn't it? I couldn't quite get 800 words out of that, but when I think of that game, I think of when the stands shake and when the camera even moves, and that was what that free kick was one of those moments, rare but beautiful.
As a Celtic fan, I've experienced that this season, but it was quite different because there wasn't fans in the ground. But I don't know if you managed to see the Hamilton-Celtic game from Boxing Day. The wind and the rain was so bad.
Yes, that's right.
That the camera was literally
that's true.
That.
That's a symbol of our times. Yeah.
So fantastic. I think Scotland would. I think they would do well. I'm not sure they would get out their group, but it is something that I do look forward to, and I think it will be a shame if there isn't any fans allowed to go. But give us your thoughts if you're watching on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Let us know what you think of the European Championship. Should they go ahead? Is there a bigger concern out there that they will not go ahead? And if you're watching us, leave us a comment. Subscribe to the channel. We're fast approaching 8,000 subscribers, which is incredible. And last week's show with Paul Mitchell had over 6,000 views, so it was a fantastic episode. And with Series 2 of the Football Insomniac, we are looking to grow every week. So, Daniel, no pressure on you this week. We're hoping to get a big number.
This will be a plummet. This will be the one of those graphs on the news about coronavirus. Usually that's the plummet is welcomed, but this will be the unwelcome plummet. A levelling off. All we can hope for is a levelling off.
I don't think that'll be the case, but what we're going to move on to discuss is what I always ask any guest that I have on, and I've been very lucky to have some fantastic guests from the world of media, and there's some brilliant guests coming up shortly. It is your dream football dinner party. So for anyone that is a first-time viewer of the show today, basically what happens is I ask my guests to name 4 people from the world of football, dead or alive, because for one night only we've managed to find a revival machine. If anyone that played Pokemon back in the day, you can revive a dead Pokemon. We've revived a dead footballer for 24 hours, and they are coming over to Daniel's house for a dinner party, for a get-together, for what would you call it down in Middlesbrough? What would be the name for
I'm not sure.
a get-together?
Because I was thinking I've probably never hosted a dinner party in my life when you sent me the question. So I was thinking I would take them out for a curry in Newcastle or somewhere lovely like that. The curry's on me.
The Scottish word is an empty. We've had an empty.
Brilliant. Great. Kevin Bridges' classic routine.
So 4 people from the world of football. I mean, you've already answered my first question. My first question I always ask is, what would you cook? But you're ordering in a curry, or you're taking them out for a curry?
I'm taking them out. We're going to get the train down, or we're going to meet in Newcastle, because I used to live there, and it's one of my favourite cities in the world, especially for a curry. So me and these fellows are off for a curry. I've broken the rules already.
Sorry, Boris, if you're watching. But who would be the first person to turn up at the train station then? Who would be the first one through the train doors?
Fine son of Middlesbrough, Don Revie, the great Leeds United manager and fleetingly England manager. I'm sure Don would have been very punctual kind of man. He strikes me as being that way. Don Revie died in Scotland, actually. He married a woman from Kirkcaldy, Elsie, and when they got married and lived on Teesside in various places, he always promised he would come up to Scotland, and he died before his time of motor neurone disease. And for Nutmeg magazine, which we'll mention later, I wrote a story a couple of years ago about his love of Scotland, and that's just a coincidental thing. But Don Revie will be first on the train station in his lovely blue mohair suit.
So who will be meeting Don Revie under the station clock?
Well, you need a bit of needle on these nights out, I think. So it has to be another son of Middlesbrough, Brian Clough, born on Valley Road, a half-hour walk from where Don Revie was born. It's a thing of tremendous pride for Teessiders that 2 of English football's greatest managers were born a walk apart from each other. I don't think we celebrate it enough. We have a statue and a plaque for Clough. We have nothing for Revie, perhaps because he never played for Middlesbrough. And it's up there with the way Scotland has produced so many managers, really. Other towns would shout more loudly about it, to have these 2 giants of the game from the same town. So you need this needle. Anyone who hasn't watched the 1974 interview between Clough and Revie on Yorkshire television just after Clough has left as Leeds manager, brilliantly done on the Damned United film as well. Go and look at it on YouTube. The needle, the ferocity, the Teesside accents, the arrogance, the wonderfully erudite football figures. I just think it would get everything off to a really good bang if we could get them 2 arguing, and maybe they could make peace over a nice booner.
And you mentioned the Damn United. That is actually one of the best football films I think I've ever seen. I think Brian Clough is portrayed expertly. Don Revie as much as well, as although he's not in the film so much, but it's just a fantastic watch. And if anyone's not seen it, I'm sure everyone has, but if you've not seen it, definitely, whilst you're stuck at home, whilst there's not a lot to do, go and give that one a watch.
Yeah, you're right. Colin Meaney as Revie is just outstanding in particular, and yeah, go and watch it if you haven't. It's still films really struggle with football action, but I'll just say it isn't as bad as A Shot at Glory in the football action stuff.
Oh, that was a good swing at that one. Another film that was set around the Newcastle area, obviously Goal. What would you rate Goal?
The Goal trilogy. Beautiful cinematography of St James Park, as far as I remember. I don't think I've seen all 3, but a better film set in Newcastle around football is Purely Belter, based on a novel called The Season Ticket, about a couple of lads who basically were stealing and robbing in the mid-90s to try and fund a Newcastle season ticket. And that's a lovely film. Well, it's heartbreaking at the end, but there you are.
And for anyone that heard that there, that was Daniel's doorbell.
It was indeed, but I'm ignoring it.
It was Ali McCoy's coming to have a go at him for taking a shot at glory. So we have Brian Clough, we have Don Revie. Who else will be meeting in Newcastle Central Station?
Well, it's a bit of a cheek. He's not a football figure as such, but for me and for many people, the greatest British sports writer of all time, Hugh McIlvanney, whose words I just love and I'm inspired by. I frequently read the compilations of his football and boxing writer. There's never been another like him. He would help bring the peace between Reevie and Clough in theory with that silky Ayrshire voice. I feel McIlvanney just had too much wonder, too much beauty and fantastic things about him. Not only could he write like the greatest, but his voice was wonderful as well. He could speak brilliantly. And I would love to have met this man. I met his brother and spent a bit of time with him, and William McIlvanney, but never Hugh. Just the most wonderful writer, and wrote about Clough and Reevie, of course, so they could reminisce about that. I don't know what age they all are in this scenario, but let's just go with
it. Well, they can be any age you want. I said, this is your night. You're setting this up.
Yes,
You're telling everybody they're going for a booner. You've managed to get Clough and Reevie together, so you can have McIlvanney at whatever age you want. It only leaves one person round the table. This restaurant only does tables for 5. So who is left to fill the gap at the table?
Well, this is truly to bring about the peace, and controversial perhaps to pick an England manager, but Gareth Southgate, probably the best centre-half I ever saw in a Middlesbrough shirt. Just such a neat footballer, probably unseen by many because he went to Middlesbrough. He should really have gone from Villa to a bigger club, I think. But he was captain when we won our first and only trophy on February the 29th, 2004. Don't need reminding of that. In the Millennium Stadium. I love how Southgate comes across. It's been said millions of times. I know in Scotland people got sick of that during the Russia World Cup, but you're going to need someone like that when you've got the, robust McIlvanney, the Clough and Reevie thing going on. You're going to need a mollifying, calm, intelligent presence like Southgate among them. And it means I can ask him about more recent times at Middlesbrough because he was manager after he'd played for Borough. And of course was sacked. I'd like to talk about more recent days in the club and the best days he lived through. It feels impossible for anyone else probably to imagine now, but that they were the glory days when Southgate was at Borough, not the days of Juninho and Ravanelli that are more famous, but the mid-2000s, the early 2000s. I saw Middlesbrough in the UEFA Cup final in Eindhoven. That's unthinkable now. So to ask about those days, the comebacks some people watching will remember against Steaua Bucharest and Basel when we came back from 2 down, 3 down to go through to the semi-final, then the final, those kind of nights. He can bring the glory while everyone else is having a scrap in the car park.
So, I have to ask this question because I've spoken about the Euros. So let's speak about the World Cup in 2018. How would you rate England's performance under Southgate? Now, obviously, they made the semi-finals. They were very close to making the final. Was it really as amazing as the press made it out, or was there a lot of luck involved there?
I think in between. The luck was in the draw, certainly. But the way they kept their heads in the penalty shootout, the first one was against Colombia, was rare for us. And that was what was different. And that was when you knew Southgate had changed something in the mentality of the players and the openness of the squad and the likability of them. They just seem like we've had years of let's say the squad that went to the South Africa World Cup wasn't full of the most likeable characters. From the outside, maybe they were really lovely guys inside. We never got to know. The manager didn't really let the press in. And this time you just felt they were a really great symbol of how multicultural England is as well. That felt good at the time. I think that was needed in the country. It bonded people. And so on the field, there was really sublime moments, but it was more of a team that you felt had more to come, and that perhaps hasn't been fulfilled quite yet, especially with the cancel. The Euros would have been at the right time last year, getting our excuses in early there. But definitely a bit of luck of the draw, and then they were found out in the semi-finals, undoubtedly, and I think would have been found out in the final. But the promise is there, and I think the years of investment in coaching is paying off, really. And it's not good. So, it's not fashionable to praise infrastructure and things, but the fact is they've spent millions and had many reviews, and footballers are coming through. England are as Scotland are producing very good footballers now.
So if we round this up, then arriving at the Nook, is there a specific restaurant of choice? We'll let you talk about this restaurant one time only. Where are you going?
I wouldn't. Do you know? It's so long since I lived in Newcastle. It'll be somewhere on the big market, so things can get a bit lively after, or we can retreat to a nice pub down by the Tyne. We'll retreat to the Crown Posada, actually one of my favourite pubs down by the Tyne to keep the night going. See if we see Mike Ashley in one of the
clubs. I'm sure he would be around there. And joining you would be Brian Clough, Don Revie, Hugh McIlvanney, and Gareth Southgate. For anyone that's watching along, tell us who you would have at your dinner party, at your gathering. You pick your word of choice, but that is who Daniel would have there. If you are watching along, leave a comment, like, subscribe. That really helps us grow the channel and grow this show. But we are going to move on to our next section today, and that is the January transfer window. Yay or nay? We're now, almost 3 weeks into the January transfer window. As a Middlesbrough fan, how has it been so far? Has there been any incomings or outgoings?
We've brought in Jordan Archer, the a Scottish goalkeeper, or certainly qualifies for Scotland, from Millwall as a reserve keeper, and that's as exciting as it's got.
I mean, that's probably more exciting than for me as a Celtic fan, because we've had nobody in and nobody out, so it's been a wonderful couple of weeks so far. But I mean, it has only been, and I did look this up, it's only been 88 days since the Premier League transfer window closed. I know in the EFL, was it the 16th of October that it was extended?
Yeah, it was late. I think on a human level, if you think about footballers themselves, do they want to be moving house or finding, somewhere to rent at this time when both countries are in lockdown? You just want. It sounds like such a simplistic thing to say, but sometimes we're capable of forgetting that the footballers have the same wants and likes and families and things to consider as us, and that's probably behind some of the lack of movement as well. It's a strange old time to be moving 200 miles away and things away from your family. I think footballers have dispensation to do so, but that has to be a factor in all of this. And there's still players hanging on from the summer that haven't got a club yet, that were freed and whose agents are trying to get the big bucks that aren't there anymore in England and Scotland, I think. My answer to the question is definitely nay, but then I'm old-fashioned. I liked what we had where it was just in the middle of March, transfer deadline. There was one deadline, and it brought a sort of crescendo. It added to the crescendo of the season. So you had transfer window, that would give you 6 weeks maybe to buy someone in, a couple of players in, to get you over the line into the playoffs. That's in Middlesbrough terms, or to keep you up even more in Middlesbrough terms. And I liked it that way, but I'm bound to say that I'm stuck in about 1997.
There's not an issue with that, I would say. Some of the great things happened around that era. But I mean, we take a look at it and just look at some of the stats. Last year, in the English Premier League, there was £200 million spent. Of a total of the whole year in the transfer window, there was 1.6 billion spent down south. So it shows that the January transfer window doesn't seem to bring in so many of the big transfers as what we see. As you say, there is a lot of teams looking to strengthen, to survive, to avoid going down. And a lot of the times it seems to be loan deals. Looking at the transfer discussions today, I think the biggest one that's out there at the minute is Tomori from Chelsea going to AC Milan. That's meant to be a loan deal. Moussa Dembele moved from Lyon to Atletico Madrid, another loan deal. There doesn't seem to be a lot of money being spent in this window, and I don't know if that is just the case of this is the way it is in January, or is this the effects of COVID finally coming into football finances? The biggest transfer so far this transfer window, Sebastian Haller, £21 million off to Ajax. I don't think there'll be that many big moves made this transfer window.
No, it's definitely a time to be cagey, isn't it? We don't quite know how the game will look in 5 months. We presume most top divisions will be completed. I think certainly the English Premier League will. Whether that's right or not is for other people to say, but such a television contracts, I think that, and I think football has to be played where possible for the joy and the escape. Lots of football figures have said that, and while you're not at games, it does give you some structure on a Saturday. It does give you some things to do, and I guess transfer rumours are a part of that. But I definitely think it's time for Jim White's yellow tie to go to the Scottish Football Museum.
You're not a fan of that then?
No, it's some drama, isn't it? I think once you get relegated from the Premier League, you start to be ensconced in your own world, and much of the football I love is lower down the chain than that in any case. But no, I'm like anyone. If it's 11 o'clock and I've got the remote control on deadline day, I'll go across and see what's happening. I love to see reporters outside the ground shivering, trying to bring exclusives from outside St James Park. So there's drama in all of that. But no, back to the March system.
I think that would be one of the major things that we lose. And there is something about transfer deadline day. And I think, was it maybe Chelsea a couple of years ago when the reporter was outside Stamford Bridge or outside Cobham training ground, and the fans are all round them, and some things get through into his ear. And I think that's what kind of ruined the transfer deadline day after that, was the fans kind of, what happened. Okay, let's be men here. Let's discuss this. The guy put a sex toy in the the Sky Sports presenter's face, and that's really what ended up having the fans being removed from transfer deadline day. So it was an awkward moment.
I laughed at the time, but the consequences have not quite been worth the prank.
It's almost like we had an idea of what football was going to be like without fans, because we've seen transfer deadline day without fans now.
That's true. Yeah, there's probably no going back. I don't think Harry Redknapp will be risking having his window down if he ever gets a job again.
And a question coming in here from Barca Boy on Periscope. He's asking, does deadline day increase the fees paid for players? Now, that's a really interesting topic, and I did do some research into this. So some of the biggest transfers that took place on deadline day in January, or in the January transfer window, was Philip Coutinho to Barcelona for £142 million. That was after Liverpool turning down bids of £120 million in the summer. The other 20 million seemed to get it over the line. We look at guys like Bruno Fernandes, or however Derek Ray likes to pronounce it on FIFA. I think it's Fernandes, for £67 million. And also Virgil van Dijk, £75 million to Liverpool. I think that's a really good point. Do you think these deadline day, does it drive up the fees for the players? Is that something that is good for football, or is it something that we could probably do without?
It's always bad, I think, isn't it? Where is all that going to end in terms of the game as a whole? But anecdotally, it feels that way, doesn't it? Like in any desperate situation, you end up paying more for things, and that was embodied in Sunderland Till I Die, in the episode where they were attempting to bring it across from
Will Grigg.
Yeah. And you watch that episode, and you'll probably have a bit of an answer to that question, I think. I don't know if that was transfer deadline day's fault, or the negotiation of the Sunderland board was perhaps off on that one.
That was a fantastic series. If anyone's not seen Sunderland Till I Die, definitely worth watching. I think the managing director is Stuart Donald of Sunderland, who I think is no longer at the club. The season before, it was someone that is familiar to Scottish football. It was Martin Bain, who used to be the chief executive at Rangers. But yeah, that Will Grigg transfer was hilarious. I believe the manager was Jack Ross.
Yeah.
£1 million for. He ends up. I think I have you back there. I think there's some gremlins on the line. Yeah, I was just explaining the transfer of Will Grigg there. I think Jack Ross was the manager of Sunderland. He only wanted to pay £1 million for him, and eventually I think the fee was closer to £3 million or £3.5 million. It was embarrassing, and it really showed the kind of shambles that Sunderland found themselves in back then.
Fascinating, though. I guess we all love those documentaries for everything they show us behind the scenes, but that was particularly interesting. The Leeds Take Me Home one had a deadline day on it as well. Just those processes, but we'll come to talking about Extra Time, the book, but one of them I've written about is late fitness tests. It's all those things we don't get to see as football fans that we find endlessly interesting, and that's one of them. And yeah, the Will Grigg transfer, don't pay over $1 million. We've got 2.8 or something.
It was terrible. Some great points coming in here. We've got Red Scotland is watching, saying players who want to improve their bank accounts go to the EPL. Players who want to improve their football ability go to La Liga. The only thing I would say on that, I think that's now changed. I don't think La Liga is the footballing capital of Europe. I would say the Bundesliga is now. I think a lot of players now make their move to the Bundesliga who develop and then end up going back to England for ridiculous amounts of money. And Mr. Briggs, and again, saying, I went down to Celtic Park on deadline day in 2012. Effie Ambrose turned up. Was worth going along just to see Charles Patterson getting harassed by fans constantly asking him for transfer rumours. These guys, I mean, obviously in the current situation we find ourselves in, that wouldn't be possible, but do you think these Sky reporters miss the hustle and bustle of the fans being in and around them?
Oh, I would say so. They do such a brilliant job. I mean, how many bored times has Sky Sports News got you through? You just put it on and you think, they do a fantastic job being outside the grounds and freezing the house. I made a bit of a joke about it, but I admire it completely. And I think, there's much more of a buzz when the fans are there haranguing them. Surely that's what they must like, giving out the rumours and dropping a few hints and all of that stuff. Why wouldn't you? The football fans ultimately, with a microphone and skill, obviously. But I'm sure they do.
And what do you make of Red Scotland then? The players wanting to move to England to improve their bank accounts. Is that something you've noticed? Even as a Middlesbrough fan, have you noticed the jump from maybe the Championship upwards just for the money?
Undoubtedly. First of all, Red Scotland, tremendous little avatar there that I noticed of the hammer and sickle. Anyway, I think undoubtedly, and I hope some years ago, the time before Abramovich came into Chelsea, that things were about to even off and we were going to look at rules within the game on maximum on wage caps and things like that. But it's not. It's just gone out of all control. And I bear the players no ill will in that. There's a lot of snobbishness around footballers because they're, how dare working class lads do well for themselves? They don't choose to pay themselves it. It's their agents who ask for it and the clubs who pay. But the system as a whole is been rotten for years, and you know that because probably this year the Championship top 2 or 3 will be the teams that came down. It already is, in fact, and it'll probably finish that way. And we'll have that for some time of yo-yo clubs up and down. West Brom will go down and go back up again. Norwich will, and that's a lot about being able to pay more and circumnavigate rules that have been put in place. And I think in the Championship the clubs are about to reject a wage cap as well, because the more moneyed clubs have put a case together. So, yes, absolutely. I think he's probably right. I find it hard to measure the qualities of football between leagues because they're different, aren't they? I'd take a blood and thunder Premier League derby over, watching, this is a criminal thing to say, over watching Barcelona pass it sideways 17,000 times, cue messages, Philistine, etc. But it's different types. It's different types of football. But I guess talking of abroad football, as Red Scotland was making the point there, I think he's probably right. But you're right, Germany as well, quality stuff.
Definitely. Joe Porter brings up a funny story. Who was the guy that slept in his car outside White Hart Lane on transfer deadline day, trying to force the move to Tottenham from West Brom? This was Peter Odemwingie, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, wasn't it? That kind of never really. Is it fair to say never really came back from not getting that move? I know he's still playing, isn't he? But is that right? Yeah,
that was hilarious. It was. I mean, Spurs are, and you've mentioned it before. Spurs are synonymous with transfer deadline day. When Harry Redknapp was in charge, it was the rolling down of the car window outside, and that even transpired into his time when he was in the I'm a Celebrity Jungle, because they did something very similar. But yeah, Peter Odemwingie, that was hilarious. I think he actually tried to get into West Brom's into Spurs Stadium, and then he was told that the deal had fell through. So that must have been heartbreaking for him. Barca boy back in again, saying the Serie A seems to be the new home for Premier League players who were once at the top and want to extend their careers. I think the standard of Serie A football has still been very, very good, and certainly this year it's one of the most exciting title races over there. Juventus, who I believe are actually going for 10 league titles in a row, losing to Inter Milan the other day. So it's definitely a good league to watch this season. In terms of Middlesbrough, what do you think will happen between now and the deadline? Are you going to bring anyone else in?
It'd be free transfers if they do. I don't think they'll spend much money. Neil Warnock seems to treat, like a good Yorkshireman, treats the Steve Gibson's money as if it's his own, which is not a bad thing after some of the managers we've had that have, Gary Monk spent a fortune on, let's not go there. And so I don't think they'll spend much. Where at the moment we are pretty much at capacity of where we can get to without spending a load of money, which is on the fringes of the playoffs. And just to be run evenly and stay relatively in the black because of Steve Gibson's money is all we can hope for this year till we get back into the ground and are able to put finance into the club that way as well. You know, I like watching us at the minute because of the small squad. Warnock's hand has been forced and he's had to play 4 or 5 that have come through the academy. And our academy is one of the very best. If footballers don't make it with Middlesbrough, many of them make it elsewhere down the leagues or even up in the Premier League. Fantastic. Doesn't get enough plaudits, really. So that is the bigger enjoyment for me now, is watching Warnock bring younger players up from the under-23s, and they've been a revelation this year. But the fringes of, it's going to take a lot to move us from the fringes of the playoffs into the playoffs. We haven't got that type of money to spend, so we're kind of happy bumbling along till we can get back in there and shout at them.
I think the only transfer that I would like to see happen at Middlesbrough, and this is very, very selfish, I would love to see Patrick Roberts come back up to Glasgow.
I'm sure, and he isn't getting a game. I've seen it written in the Teesside Gazette. He's not. Warnock hasn't played him much at all in this spell, and he was fantastic the games before he got injured in his first spell. So it's very possible if you've got whatever the deal is on his wages, take him back home. I know how much you all loved him.
Oh, I think me personally loved him just as much as any other Celtic fan. But yeah, fantastic footballer, and it's just a shame to see how his career has went so far. So, I mean, basically we're left with 2 options here with the January transfer window. Do we only open it in the summer, or do we do, like you said, leave it open all year, leave it the way it used to be, have it closed in March, and limit the amount of transfers that each team can have so that people aren't spending ridiculous amounts of money? If you're left with those 2 decisions, which one would you choose?
I'd go for the March option, and to look properly at infrastructure and spending. But unfortunately, I don't see the big clubs ever consenting to that particular one.
So for me, I think I would have it in a similar approach. But I think January, where the transfer deadline is in January right now, I think that should be the deadline. It opens in the summer and it closes at the end of January. And I think after that, what you've got is your lot. And only in exceptional circumstances, which I know is part of the thing in the EFL, you can bring in loan signings. We're not able to do that in Scotland. So, I think you've got to give it, there's a space for it, but I think the structure that it is at the minute is not the way it should be. And if you're watching on social media, do get involved. Tell us what you think of the January transfer window. Should it still be a thing? Has it brought some great transfers over its history? Has it brought some terrible transfers? Let us know what your favourites of that are, and let us know what you would do to restructure it. But Daniel, we can't have you on here without discussing your career, without discussing this incredible book, which I have here in front of me, Extra Time, and discussing Nutmeg magazine. So from the start, let's start with Nutmeg. How did you get yourself involved with Nutmeg magazine?
Just by writing in the very start, and then Ali, who came up with the idea and designs Nutmeg and is publisher of it, invited me to get more involved, to try and bring other writers in to look at articles, and then to do the podcast. So I quickly learned how to edit the podcast, and have gone on to, I've done about 60 now, I think. It's always a big part of things, and I make the films as well. So bringing in different jobs I've done in the past, non-football, bringing those skills to Nutmeg. Nutmeg, I fell in love with him as soon as I saw issue 1, because it's a beautiful, you can see a copy up here. It's a beautiful production. It smells great. It's each issue comes out every 3 months, and it has around 70,000, 80,000 words. There's a lot of stuff. There'll be a Celtic piece in every issue if you go back and look. We were thinking of doing a pie chart of which clubs we get most submissions about, actually, and I think the Celtic Green would be up there. We get a lot of Dundee United proposals, a lot of Celtic. It's interesting, a lot of Hibs as well. Some clubs seem to be written about more than others. But what I will say is about the magazine is we treat clubs equally. So Cowdenbeath will get the same space as Celtic if someone's come up with the right idea and it's well written. So it's that mix of articles about tactics and the present and transfers and nostalgia and interviews that I just loved immediately and wanted to be more involved. And then since last year, Ali sort of stepped aside a bit and paid me for more days to be editor, and I've enjoyed that tremendously, getting to see the articles come in and read what ideas people are coming up with, and it just doesn't seem to be remotely running dry. We're over full for every issue, so we have to knock back some stuff and keep some stuff on. And it's become a nice mix of established writers. So in the last issue up there, we had Patrick Barclay, for instance, and people writing the first piece. The reason I became a writer was because I started in football fanzines. And so to be able to use some of that ethos to give people a start in writing is very dear to my heart as well. And it helps being an outsider. It helps being an Englishman. I have no prejudices against any Scottish clubs. I might have irrational hatreds of English clubs, I've grown up with. But up here, I'm very much in love with the game here. I travel all around. I watch Hibs mainly because me and my little girl live near the ground, and so we go to watch Hibs. But I travel around as well. I love lower division Scottish football, juniors, Lowland, Highland League. I love the authenticity of the game up here and how ingrained it is in society. And that comes across in Nutmeg, I think, and definitely having the outsider's eye and the rose-tinted specs and none of those old biases and things really helps me with that.
And I think one of the team here at A State of Mind, Kevin Graham, I think he's had maybe one or two articles published in Nutmeg, and he really does credit you for a lot of his poetry and for getting involved in writing. So for anyone that is a fan of Kevin Graham on this channel, you have Daniel Gray to thank for having Kevin Graham around and for some of his analogies. So make sure that you thank him after the podcast. But I mean, we're going to take a look at Extra Time here. And the book says it's Extra Time, 50 Further Delights of Modern Football. This isn't the first book within the series. There is other books. The Saturday 3 p.m. is the first 50 stories. So, what was the inspiration? Yeah, and also Black Boots and Football Pinks. We were actually speaking about Football Pinks. Football Pinks is before my time. But Paul John Dykes, who's the kind of the main guy here at A State of Mind, we were actually having a discussion about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about getting yourself on the podcast, and they remember the Football Pinks. For anyone that's maybe of the younger generation, what was a Football Pink?
And green in some places as well. The paper that came out about 5:30, 5:45, with the match report of your local game and other local games. And the greatest thing about them for me was the back page had every result in England and Scotland on it, all of the attendances, the updated league tables. It was a big part of my match day ritual, getting the Sports Gazette as it was on Teesside after the game. And each town had its own, really. Edinburgh alone had two, had the green and the pink, which were probably divided along Hearts and Hibs lines, it seems to me. And a wonder when you think a match report was done and out by the time you were still just about, in our case, we used to get autographs, and by the time we got back into town, the Gazette was out and you had a match report and it smelt great and it was all part of the textures and feels of the match day. Sadly departed from every town now, and you go to an away game and get that town's football pink as well. But it was the back page for me to see all those results, attendances, beautiful. Almost as soon as the game had finished, they were all there. Just seems like a real feat of engineering. So that book you mentioned is the middle one of the series. The first one was Saturday 3 p.m. Delights of Football. That one was a more nostalgic book about things that have generally gone from football, like the Football Pink, and then to bring you back to Extra Time, that's 50 Further Delights of things that do still exist in the game.
So, I mean, we take a look at it. What was the reason behind the number? Why 50 stories?
It came from, to cut a long story short, a theft from Wetherspoons in Durham. They had all of these books on the shelves, and I was with my daughter, great parenting. She was about 6, and I was saying, get Daddy a blue book, get Daddy a red book. She picked out this blue book, and it was by a writer called J.B. Priestley, who's been my favourite writer for years. He died in the mid-1980s, very old man. But it was a J.B. Priestley book called Delight, and never heard of it. And he wrote 100-odd essays about things that were still enjoyable about life after World War II. And I just loved them. There were things like smoking a cigar in bed, annoying a civil servant. They were very much of their time. But coming back up to Edinburgh on the train, I opened this book and I thought, do I feel delights about football still? It was one of those times where I was quite disillusioned with the amount of money in the game and various things. So I started to write a list, and I quickly came up with about 60 things that I still love about the game. One of them, funnily enough, was seeing a ground from the train. That was the first one in the book. And I thought, I do still love this game. These things do still exist. It's not all about nostalgia. I wrote up a few, and the publisher loved the idea. Kept down to 50 because it makes for a small sort of gift book. I don't mind when someone calls it a bathroom book or worse, because that is sometimes the only chance some people get to read. Each chapter takes you a few minutes to read. Say no more on that front about the smallest room in the house. But that's it's good size, it's a gift book size. And I thought that was it for 50. But once they'd come out 3 or 4 years ago, I kept on writing the list, and more things kept coming to me, and people would submit them to me as well, little delights that I'd missed. And so the result is Extra Time, which came out just before Christmas there.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic read, and as you said, it only takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes to read each chapter. I think the longest chapter is maybe 5 pages, and some of the chapters are 2 or 3 pages. And for football fans at the minute, especially during this period when we can't get into the grounds, when we can't go to watch our teams, it is a bit of nostalgia. When you look at it, there's all the things that you were so used to doing. I mean, what my favourite chapter, and it's got a story attached to it, is speaking about the club lotteries and the halftime draws, because I go to the games with my uncle's friends. They've been taking me since basically since I could walk, and they always go on about, if we win this draw, because Celtic's draw I think is the biggest draw in Scottish football, maybe in UK football as well. It used to be £20,000, I think, and now it's about £10,000. And they always say, if we win this, we're going to go away. We're going to go to Lisbon. We're going to go to Seville. We're going to go somewhere we've been before and spend the money. And everyone puts £1 in, and they buy 6 and 7 tickets. And then the draw comes at half time, and you just see this sea of confetti over the top tier into the lower tier with all the losing tickets. But I have actually saw one person who's won it.
Because that's the thing I mentioned in the chapter was, has anyone ever seen anyone who... I was so keen to write about that confetti you mentioned, all those years of seeing the halftime confetti go up like that. So that chapter, that's the second one in the book, Club Lottos and Sellers. It's all the books. A lot of these things are not about what happens in the match, though some of them are. The first chapter in Extra Time is local radio commentators. The third one is indirect free kicks in the box. So some of it is on the pitch. You know, another one of them is when goalkeepers go forward. But a lot of it is about fan behaviour and about what we get up to in our rituals and all of these things. And the nice thing is they're really universal. So you can talk about that confetti somewhere as huge and wonderful as Parkhead, but it'll happen at Central Park, Cowdenbeath as well. So these things are intended to be universal. So I don't name players much, and I barely name teams, because I want you to use your own examples inside your own head. You know, in Black Boots and Football Pinks, there's a chapter about little man and big man up front, and I want people to picture their own, whether it's Sunderland fans doing Phillips and Quinn, these various things. So it's a mix of fan behaviour, things that happen on the pitch, things that I hope are funny, like there's a chapter about animals on the pitch, things about the rituals and superstitions. I've done a chapter on people patting police horses, which a lot of these things you think, does it still happen? Am I just imagining it? And I can picture the moment. January the 1st last year, I managed to escape the family routines and go to Preston away to see the borough. And I stood by some police horses, and I must have seen 10 or 12 people pat a police horse inside 5 minutes. So you know you're onto a universal thing. They have to mean, most of these are not individual, they're all shared things. Some are, you know, there's one called Going With My Daughter about that particular thing, but I hope that's even universal. Anyone who's gone with their kid or indeed gone with their parent, that'll mean something to them.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that bit in a minute, because I think that's something that will resonate with a lot of people that's watching today. But I do have to ask the question, have you ever wrote the chapter, and I've not had the opportunity to read the other books, have you ever wrote the chapter about the pie getting stuck in the tinfoil container?
No, but there's number one for the third book. One of my pie delight in Scottish football, right, is how, because your Scottish pie is different to your English football ground pie. It's your more Scotch pie base with the sort of crater. My delight in Scottish football is how brilliant, and this is like innate in Scottish people, you are at being able to balance the pie and get brown sauce usually or ketchup right in the middle of the pie without moving nothing. And you've usually got a hot drink in your mouth as well, holding the cup like that. It's just beautiful. I've watched it in so many grounds. I think you either do that at school or you're all just born with this particular skill.
And not to keep going on the topic of pies, because some people will get really hungry listening to this, but some of the pies in Scottish football are legendary as well. You've got the Kilmarnock Killie pie. I think Ross County do a haggis and steak pie as well.
Well, I'm veggie. I've been veggie for 7 years, I think. So my thing in Scotland is the macaroni pie. Again, doesn't occur in English football, and I'm quite the connoisseur of these. If anyone wants to get in touch with the supply.
So Philip Halloran here saying, "Can he beat a pie in Bovril at half time?" And I'm sure that'll be within the next book.
and well, Bovril's one of those things that just doesn't transfer out of football. You can buy Bovril and you can stand in your garden and try and have it, but it's just not quite the same. Hopefully these little chapters do take you back to match day for a fleeting while. That was the worry with the book. It's all about being at the match. Are people going to go, this is too painful for me? But actually people have got in touch and said, for a few hours I was back at the match there and I loved it. Some of them have ended up being weirdly prophetic. One of the chapters is called Hearing the Players, which was about how rare it is to hear the players. Now you can hear the players. One of them's called Being in a ground on a weekday afternoon, because if I go to a little town, I will go and try and walk around the ground on my own. So, but hopefully, extra time takes you back into the match for a little while.
Yeah, definitely. And before we kind of wrap up on that, there's one topic that I said we should really talk about, and it's a really emotional chapter, I think, in this book, and it is the going to the game with your daughter for the first time. And I know a lot of people that the first game will remember going to the game with their family member, with their family friend. A lot is said about we're having some real gremlins today. I can only apologise for that. But a lot is said for that experience when the kids come through in towards the seating area, and they look out onto the stadium, and the eyes, as you mentioned here, the eyes are as wide as you've ever seen them before. And it's an experience we remember as fans. And obviously, I've not had that opportunity yet. I don't have kids of my own, but you've experienced this. When your kids actually go out and do that, does it take you back to your first game? And what's the experience really like?
It's she's been to, well, had been to, till it all stopped, to 26 games precisely with me now, of Middlesbrough and Hibs, and a second division Czech game in Prague, but let's not go there. And it's renewed my love of football. When you first have a kid, they renew your love of nature and the simple things. They pull sand through their hands and they think it's incredible. They point at ladybirds for hours on end, and it renews your connection with all that. This has renewed my connection with football. The questions she asked, why is their own referee? Why can't the referee kick the ball? All of these brilliant questions, they either make you go, God, yeah, football's stupid, or they, which is a lovely thing sometimes in any case, and they take you back. So in fact, there's a chapter in the book as well about going up the stairs, because it has brought back that. You never see anything as big as a football pitch until you're a kid. You're never around so many people until you're in a football crowd when you're a kid. And so it's been lovely seeing it through her eyes. The chapter itself is a sequel to the one in Saturday 3 p.m. called My Daughter Listening at the Window, because we live within hearing distance of Easter Road Stadium. She used to open up the window when she was 4 or 5 and go, please will you take me to football, and ask all these questions. But the funny thing about that was she would do it on like a Tuesday morning as if football was on all the time, like CBeebies. And the time came and I took her, and it's also that rite of passage. So the most emotional times have been when I've been going with my dad, with her granddad, and with her, the three of us, turnstiles together. Last season, seeing my daughter teach my dad how to work an electronic turnstile just felt like a rite of passage happening in front of my very eyes.
I mean, and it's a fantastic story, and it's just one of 50 incredible stories. I'm just reading the back page here, and from BBC Radio, one of the comments is, Gray writes like Lowry paints, superb. And having read this, I can absolutely agree with it. It's been 50 fantastic stories. It's out now, and it's available. Where is it available? Amazon. Where can you buy things now? This is a difficult period.
You're supposed to say all good bookshops, but all good online bookshops, Amazon and all the rest. And I sell signed copies at danielgraywriter.com. If you'd like it signing to you or a friend or anything, go on there and I email you and we sort that out.
Yeah, and I really recommend it. It's a fantastic read, and especially at the minute with not being able to get to the grounds, it's something that can help you reminisce about the great times in football. Incredibly, the chat is going off about pies. As soon as
He
you
always
mention
does.
pies,
He always does.
that's the thing. Philip O'Halloran coming in here. Can he beat a pie in Bovril at half time? That was the last one. Richard Murray, Forfar Athletic, pies and Brady's are my favourite.
I have to put in and
the
say,
Forfar Brady.
when you have your Bovril, you're doing your patriotic duty because it was invented by a guy from Newton Grange outside Edinburgh, Bovril Johnson. So you're it wasn't his actual name; it was changed to that. But you're doing your patriotic duty by having your Bovril.
Joe Porter coming in saying the Pataudry pie is made from seagull meat.
At least he didn't go for sheep and go for that stereotype.
Well, I mean, mutton is what makes a Scotch pie,
That's
so
true,
that would have made sense. Richard Murray, I've been to games at Pataudry where there's been more seagulls than punters. And also Joe Porter coming in here saying that the Cali thistle pies were no bad. So anyone that's experienced that might know. Red Scotland kind of wraps this up, and I think this is a really, this really sums up the story we were just discussing about taking your kids to football. My son's face as we walked out in the top tier at the Lisbon Lions stand for the first time was a joy to behold. And I think no matter what the scoreline is that day, no matter what happens in the game, you've always got that memory of your kids seeing what they've seen on TV, being there for the first time and living that experience. And it's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings back thoughts of your own first time, which is just it's a nice place to go in your head, isn't it? And on YouTube, indeed. And we need that at the moment. We need escape at the moment. And so there's nothing wrong with winding backwards a bit with misty eyes.
We can look back to Middlesbrough at the UEFA Cup final. We can look back over Celtic's 9 in a row. We can look back over lots of things that have happened. And next week, we will look back over what has happened this week in football. There will be a lot to discuss. But this week, I have had the pleasure of being joined by Daniel Gray. Daniel, we've been speaking now for over an hour. It's absolutely flew by. It's been great having you on to hear your stories and lots of great comments about you in the chat as well. So I'm sure you'll go back and read that at a later bit. Where can we find you on social media after this? And how can people get involved in Nutmeg Magazine?
Yeah, nutmegmagazine.co.uk. You'll see subscription deals on there and a few online articles. We generally print, or you'll find the podcast on Apple and all of the rest, the Nutmeg podcast. My own website, danielgraywriter.com, and on Twitter at d_gray_writer. And thanks for having me on. I'm back to homeschooling my child. I'm going to get her to draw a stadium. It's not in the grid. It's not in the grid from school, but it's a task to decide to make it a fancy stadium. It counts as art.
And just to wrap this up here, Barca boy, Dan's a good beard too. So it's obviously a good beard man.
I keep saying it. It's only a lockdown beard, and I keep saying it's going as soon as lockdown's over, but I don't know when that is. So it's carrying on.
Richard Murray, great guest. Need more guys like this. Well, we have a lot more guests like this coming up. We are working on some fantastic guests over the next few weeks. One that is really in the pipeline for next week, which I think will be a fantastic guest. I can't name them yet, but do stay tuned to my social media channels and you'll see when we get that confirmed. Last week we were joined by Paul Mitchell. This week by Daniel Gray. Season 2 of the Football Insomniac is up and running. And if you have any suggestions for guests, please get in touch. But until next week, thank you very much for getting involved. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us. Please stay safe. Yeah, of course. Please stay safe. Take care, and we'll see you all next week.